Welcome back, everybody, to the Grit, Give, Recognize, Implement Time podcast. I'm Steve Nathanson here with my good friend, Kieran Diorio. Kieran, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really look forward to this opportunity to talk to you because of how much synergy we have and the similarities we also have in our coaching style. So, welcome, thank you, and if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers.
Sure thing. Thanks, Steve. Good to be here. I'm Kieran Diorio. I'm a certified professional coach. I mainly work with high performers with the intention of accelerating their family happiness without sacrificing their business results. So, a lot of work around relationships, a lot of work around family. Um, Oddly enough, when the relationships and family situations improve and optimize, the work results tend to do so as well. A little bit about what I do.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great point in there as well. We often hear the term, right, whole person. And I think that's what you're really referring to is we're not just work. We're not just life. We're a whole person and they all
Yeah.
blend together. So when one area is off, it can affect us in the other areas of our lives.
Yeah, agreed. I work with a few leaders, and we joke about connecting with employees or someone on our team. We see them. We might also benefit if we see their spouse and their kids and their friends, and they're usually all with them
Yeah.
in any given situation.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually on that, what I'm really curious about is what do you see on the mentality side with your clients? We were talking briefly before this, and we were talking a little bit about feeling stuck. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm actually curious to hear a little bit more about that. What do you find when your clients feel stuck?
Yeah, we've kicked these things around. Be that sensation of being stuck is it's normal, it's natural, it's understandable. Everybody gets there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we tend to land there from a variety of things. There are a lot of things that might put us at that place where we feel stuck, or we feel at the effect of things, or we feel helpless, right? And we've talked about some of the behaviors that happen, right? Things like
Right.
avoidance, things like anger. A lot
Mm,
of different things can come out of those different energetic presentations. Yeah, so I'd say if there's one thing that I would land on that as a real source, or a real block to getting unstuck, is that superpower of acceptance.
mm,
And I think about acceptance, and let me be a little vulnerable here. As a younger man, I saw acceptance as giving up,
mm,
or surrendering, or being a victim.
mm,
And the older I get, and the more folks I have the pleasure and privilege to work with, and the more I learn about this, acceptance is something that doesn't necessarily mean giving up. It just means we're releasing our resistance to what is. And
mm.
that's usually a threshold or gateway to getting unstuck. But I don't know what's coming up for you as I share some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious to dig into that a little bit further because I think that's something that resonates a lot with folks. And when we talk about the acceptance, in this case, are we really talking about kind of embracing where I am now versus maybe this perception of where I should be? And I'll share a great
Yeah.
example with you, and I can see you nodding. So here's one I come across all the time, say with athletes coming off of maybe injury or being sick. I was
Mm-hmm.
at this level. I could run 5 7 minute miles, let's just say as a random example. But I'm not even close to there now. It's hard for me to even run, say, 3 miles at an 8:30 or a 9 minute pace. And they're hard on themselves because they're looking at where they were versus where they are now and not maybe accepting that disparity. Uh, but to your point, kind of embracing and accepting that this is where I am now and that's okay frees me up to walk that path to get back to where I was. So I really like that point, and I think it's important because we all have kind of this dual nature inherently, things that serve us, things that don't serve us, and when we were, say, younger and maybe very driven, it could have helped us to get to where we are.
Hmm.
But now maybe I'm skewed a little bit. And in your leader situation, it could be I put so much time and energy and effort into work, my life is now out of balance. And it affects my family life and the time with my kids. And I'm missing things. And I feel a little bit less unfulfilled or overwhelmed or burnout. And I'm curious if you see it maybe play out that way with the folks that you coach.
Yeah, boy, when you talked about the athletics reference, I remember being a younger athlete. That might be a generous term, but you get hurt, you have an injury.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things to accept. I don't know if you shared that
Yeah.
sensation. You've got a race coming up, you're hurt, you can't perform, and you know it. And I think in that moment, in that state, in that energetic presentation, it's hard to get much done, right? Even though, hey, it's not your fault, and all these different things contributed to the situation, and you're in a pickle. Um, all the emotions, the catabolic things that come up,
Yeah.
they're very normal and natural, but they don't really help, right? And I like what you talked about, getting to a place where things are okay, and um, we can move forward. And I think about going to a leadership um, challenge or opportunity, or maybe I kind of look at, there's like acceptance 101, and then there's like acceptance at the 400 level, if we use the college metaphor. um, hey, if it rains today and I can't go to Ohio Pile with the dog, I can accept that. That's
Right.
pretty easy, right? But man, if something's coming up with my son or my business, there's money on the table, or someone I really care about, that's a higher level of acceptance that comes into play. And something you said is just coming up for me now
Yeah.
about what we might accept even when the stakes are high. And I think about when a client gets to the place where they know they can't accept, or they can't change the situation completely right now. That is just not possible. Maybe the leadership project, the organizational work that has to be done can take 6 months or a year. Right,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty common. Um, One thing we can accept is that we can change direction right now. We can do a little course correction right now, and then we're taking a little bit of our power back into our hands. We're opening our eyes back up. We're out of that um, mentality of being at the effect of things. And boy, it's a little baby step, but you and I know coaching can have a lot of singles in it. Doesn't
Yep.
have to be a double or a triple or a grand slam or anything like that. And then we get back into motion. Then we're no longer locked down. Then we're operating a bit more freely, and when we're there, we're a little bit more objective, right? Even if the course correction doesn't work, we can make another course correction immediately, even on a 6 month or 1 year horizon, whether it's at work or with our families or our personal health, right? That principle applies everywhere.
Yeah. And I like what you're hinting at, because it's a couple of key things come up for me as we're talking through that. Is it's number one, at the acceptance level, is embracing who we are as human beings, right? Giving ourselves that permission that it's okay to be a natural reaction of maybe I have more of these non-serving or these negative feelings come up at the moment, but that's okay. It's a natural part of who I am, because I am able to embrace the opposites, and I'm also able to accept and embrace that, you know what, there are things I am in control of, and there is a way forward, and I can walk that path, and I can take small steps to change that, to
Yeah.
make this larger thing happen. So I like the course correction analogy. And let's say if we maybe make a 5-degree course correction, it doesn't look like a whole lot at the beginning, but as we say travel through time, or if we're driving a car or driving a boat, by the time we get to where we're going 6 months from now, it is quite a bit different, right?
Yeah.
It's helped us get to somewhere perhaps we didn't even think was possible, because we were perhaps so stuck in what wasn't serving us, what wasn't
Yeah.
helping us. But I can finally see that it is possible for me to make that shift. So the control piece, the acceptance piece, leads me ultimately to where I do want to go, and
Yeah.
helps get me out of this tunnel vision, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
Mm.
actually I'm curious. when we talk about maybe the specifics for your folks, are there common themes around kind of the mentalities that do keep them stuck? Maybe what they think or what they say to themselves. Are there themes that you find for your folks?
Yeah, a lot of the classic inner blocks in coaching will come up. Things like the belief system, limiting belief being the block, the assumptions we tend to make,
Mm-hmm.
right? The interpretations. I think about the power of interpretations, and I'll speak for myself. If I'm not in a conscious place, my interpretation is usually not that true, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about how often that comes up, and whether it's day to day or under stress, those inner blocks are the things that, again, totally normal, totally understandable. We have to have a lot of this stuff as we run scripts in our own consciousness, so we can operate effectively and promptly and powerfully in the moment and in any project. Um, it's just so helpful to pause, take a look at those things. And I won't get hung up on labels. Think about the inner talk track that's happening in the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to connect into an emotional presentation, and it's going to connect into very predictable behaviors, all normal. And these are all okay, to your point about recognizing that we're human.
Yeah.
And but it's also so helpful to recognize that, hey, I'm human. I might have, I might, I might be angry, or maybe I'm experiencing some anger, or I have some anger, all to the point where, hey, I have emotions. I am not emotion, right? I'm something bigger than that. So when we take a little bit of time, and it's not always, it's easier said than done, and especially in heated moments, but we look at, how am I interpreting a situation?
Yeah.
And is this interpretation really that accurate? Is it serving me in this situation? Is it serving the people I care about? Is it serving the organization? Um, what's another interpretation? Right, like super simple. Humans are complex, but we do simple. When we break it down into simple things, that will often just turn the key and get us going, and get us out of that place. When you talk about being stuck, brings me to thinking about when we're in that binary mindset where it's like yes or no, zero or one, sink or swim,
Mm-hmm.
fight or flight, friend or
Right.
foe. There's one way to do this. This is it. And okay, we want that if we're walking down a dark alley and we see two shady characters. We want that energy.
Right.
But that's to be used in appropriate measure. If we're operating like that with our families, or we're operating like that with our teams at work, probably not going to be sustainable, probably not going to be the most powerful way to operate. And going back to, like, if I have a certain interpretation of X, if it's really absolute, that it may or may not be true, may or may
Mm-hmm.
not be serving me or the team or the family. Um, might be really helpful to just take a step back and look at that as a potential block, and find some alternatives to it. I don't know. I was rambling there. Does that make sense, Steve?
No, no, it's good. There's a really good point, and actually several really good points in there. And I'd love to expand on that because one of the things that I want to maybe just point out from the get go is we're not alone in this. We
Yeah,
all are
great point.
human beings, and
Yeah.
we all can feel stuck at one point or another in our lives, whether it's at work or, say, athletically, or whatever it may happen to be in our lives. We're not alone in it. We tend to feel like we are by ourselves. No one else understands or no one else can help us. But that's one thing I want to just bring out as we're talking through this, because I asked you to summarize themes, right, that you see. So it's not just one person you're talking about,
Mm,
it's multiple people across the board, and it's commonalities that you see in them. And so that's one thing I want to just kind of put out there for our listeners and our viewers today, is that we are not alone. There are other
mm,
people who have gone through this and who can help us as well. And because they've gone through this and they've overcome it, guess what? It's possible for us to do the same. And one of the keys that Kieran is really getting into is, let's summarize it as awareness. This awareness of what is coming up for me in the moment. Are my feelings, my thoughts, my behaviors, are they serving me? Meaning, are they helping me? Or are they not helping me? Am I angry and is it keeping me down? Is it causing me to be short with family members? And is it causing that to be a conflict? That's what I mean by non-serving, things that are not helpful. And so I think to your point, when we have those moments, it's being aware of what's coming up for me and that it's okay that it's naturally going to happen. It's okay that something makes you angry. It's an emotion we have as human beings. The question is, what do we do from there? You were talking about that talk track, right? Our inner monologue, our self-talk, other words for it. In that moment, what do we do with that? Well, first off, I have to recognize, number one, that I'm getting angry. And then I think to your piece about acceptance that we started off with, I call it really kind of acknowledgement, right? I'm acknowledging that this is a part of me. Guess what? It's okay for me to be angry because this did upset me. That's okay because I have this choice in that moment when I recognize that's happening to either let that consume me, negatively impact my family, or I can embrace what's going to help calm me down, make me more relaxed, maybe challenge the perspective there a little bit and say, is this really what's happening or going on? And then how do I embrace what is going to help serve me and impact me the way I want, impact the other people around me the way that I want, and maybe even at work, impact the organization as well. So I really like the nuggets you're starting to bring out there. And I think being aware of it in the moment is a key. I think acknowledging and embracing and accepting us in that moment is also a key. And then recognizing we have this choice to either embrace what's going to help us get out of that or let it consume us is critical as well. And knowing the impact it's going to bring helps us get out of that. So I really
Yeah.
like that. I truly appreciate you bringing that. I want to dive into that just a little bit further, but before I do, I want to turn it back to you because I think something's coming up for you right now, and I
Yeah,
would love to hear it.
just pivoting or echoing what you're saying there. The the reminder or the awareness that we are always at choice. So powerful. Like, boy, when the minute I have realize I have a choice, I'm free, and I'm stepping back into some power. Maybe I handed the reins off to the situation or another person or whatever, or my emotions. Moment I go back to a place, or a client goes back to the place, and there's an awareness of choice. Things start to open up, and we are always at choice. There aren't too many have tos if we're being really objective about our lives. There are things we might feel we have to, but um, it's really a giant stack of choices moment by moment. And when you bring up that point of being at choice, oh, just it just opens up the possibilities and just something to really like I have a little, me with my post-it notes, old school. I have one there. It says, what choices do I have? And I could
Yeah.
look at that in any moment and and reconnect into um, some of my power again. If I'm feeling a victim to things, or I'm feeling at the effect of things.
Yeah. And that's a great prompt to into how to do this, right? So let's maybe dive a little bit deeply
Yeah.
into that because it's a very common theme amongst, I'm sure, people that you work with, people that I work with as well. I mean, this is definitively the number one thing that I always find my coaching gets into is building confidence and overcoming negativity, whether that's limited beliefs, whether that's literally negative people in the office as well, and how they influence us. Number one area. So in that moment, what I always like to say is that awareness piece is critical. It's not just only maybe how I'm feeling, but it's also what are the thoughts that come up for me? What are the behaviors that typically come out as well, right? So if I'm angry or if I'm upset, I'm going to feel that frustration. I may feel flushed. I may not be able to think straight. Um, I may only be focused in on what's making me angry and thinking about that. And maybe I'm distracted. Maybe I get up and I'm huffing and puffing. Uh, there's people who throw chalk across rooms as well, right? So whatever it is for you, what are the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, right, that are coming up? Because when I create that awareness, it's easier for me to notice those in the moment, say, oh, yeah, right, this is some of the stuff that's not serving me. So how do I flip that? What's the opposite? One trick, we don't process negatives in our brains, right? So if I tell you to not jump off that bridge or to not smoke, I've got to first think about either jumping or smoking in order to think
Yeah.
about not doing those things.
Yep.
So what's the thing that's going to embrace me? I want to stay on the ground. I want healthy lungs. So what is it that we
Mm.
actually want that we can say to ourselves that doesn't continue to keep us in that kind of negative trap, right? By finding what is the opposite, what is it that we do want. So in that moment, when we focus on that, we actually naturally get over that hurdle that says, well, if I don't want this, I have to first think about what I don't want in order to think about, not doing it. If we want a prompt to help us go through that thought process, I think your post-it note is fantastic because we're very visual human beings and people. So when we see something constantly in our purview, let's say I'm always right now at my desk working remotely, and if I have a coworker that just sets me off all the time, maybe in talking with Kevin, uh, you know, apologies to any of the
Yeah.
Kevins out there,
Sorry, Kevin.
random name, right? But let's say in conversations with Kevin, Kevin's always resistant, and maybe that gets your goat, and you just kind of keep escalating the conversation, and it blows up. Maybe there's a sticky note that says "stay calm" instead of "don't get upset," "don't um, be angry at Kevin." Let's get the positive there. Stay calm, be relaxed. Whatever it is that we actually want, we can have that sticky there or some visual poster or image that brings that out of us. And by seeing that constantly, it's a cue in that moment. Oh, yeah, I'm getting upset. I want to be calm. So, what's going to help me engage in that calmness to bring this conversation back down, right to that level? So, there's a lot of tips and tricks. We can go even further in that, but I want to pause and turn it back over to you and see what you find with your clients to help when you're talking about that inner track and in that moment to overcome.
Sure thing. You touched on something that's a biggie for me personally and in the work that I do with my clients. Somatics. Hey, these places we go, they have energetic consequences. They have emotional consequences or connections. They have feelings. They have thoughts. They have behaviors. They also have physical manifestations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking for myself. I'm speaking for a lot of my clients who have back pain. There's nothing wrong with their back. They store stress there. I'm not saying that there are real back issues and whatnot out there. Uh, there are very real situations where we have folks who might put a lot of stress in a certain part of their body and it manifests in a lot of back pain, very, very common. So, um, when you talked about recognizing the impact of a given situation, or it could be the positive, right? If I'm doing something that's really honoring my values and I love doing it, I'm feeling no pain, right? And the classic saying of feeling no pain without the beer, right? Um, so when you talk about somatics, it's so helpful to hold awareness there. Like, um, if I'm feeling tight in my gut, that means certain things to me. If I feel a little bit of pain in my lower back and it's the same place every time, that means something to me. It's just another point of awareness. It's an indicator on my dashboard that says, hey, hang on, you're internalizing something, probably external. Here's an opportunity to look at that and release it. And one of the techniques I really for the folks that are game, things like centering. We can center ourselves, and hey, this is not, I don't want to sound woo woo, this is something that athletes do. This is something that our great leaders do. This is something where high performing people go very often to make sure that their mind is clear, to make sure that their body is connected, to make sure that they're in that state of flow. So it can be awareness of breath. There are a lot of techniques around there. It can be it can just be maintaining some kind of exercise routine. So when we show up, we've got the physical um, stuff to handle the situation, whether even if it's we don't have a physical job, but like sitting around all day. Oh god, that can really wear you down
Yeah.
sometimes if we're in that we have to travel a lot, we have to drive for our jobs or fly or different things like that. really, really simple, really basic, but these are these little things, these little filters that have big impacts on how we're showing up in the presentation or before the conversation. Well,
Mm-hmm.
let's pick on Kevin a little bit. If you're, Kevin's a tough customer or a tough person to work with, and you're girding yourself before that physically girding yourself before that conversation with Kevin, you're going to show up that way too in
Right.
in how you communicate with him, how you listen, all those different things. So there's a lot of work we could do on the physical side, which can dramatically benefit how we're performing and how we're perceiving and how we are hence experiencing and operating in that situation. Like even right now, Steve, as I'm talking to you, I'm doing a little centering exercise. You can't see it, but it's very simple, and it keeps my mind in one place, and it keeps me focused, and it keeps me engaged, and it keeps me a little happy in the moment. So, a lot of little tricks we can do there to stay connected to our strength and our power.
Yeah, so let's open that up a little bit because there's a lot of different ways to center. And you're right. I think typically people go, "Oh, well, that's woo woo. I don't like to meditate. That's not for me." But there's so much more
Mhm.
to doing that. And so I'll
Yeah,
share something with the audience right now. Is guess what? I actually do not meditate. I don't find that's what serves me the best. So I actually do different things. So let's talk about kind of those options. I visualize a lot.
Mhm.
So I do think about what I want, what I'm going to do, what I want to accomplish. That's something that grounds me. So for instance, if I'm out on a run, I will often think about winning races, winning an
Yeah,
Ironman, crossing
yeah,
first, making the world championships. Now, I haven't done that yet, but I visualize about it. And I naturally find I start picking up a little bit when I do that and
sure.
I start running a little bit faster. But that's not the only thing that I visualize. I visualize what I want in my company. I visualize to your dark alley scenario. If I'm walking alone at night and I see someone who initiates maybe that fight or flight moment, what am I going to do in that moment? Those are things that help ground me, keep me centered, keep me oriented towards what I want. So visualization is one other technique that can be used, say in this scenario before our meeting with Kevin. How do I want the conversation to go? How do I want to be in that conversation? So that can happen. Other potential ways. Meditating is about really kind of being present in the moment. There's a lot of breath work with it, clearing our minds. And while maybe that's not quite for us, there's things we can borrow from it. So maybe I want to sit in a dark, quiet room that just kind of removes external stimulus for me. And maybe that's what I need. Is maybe just close my eyes for a little bit, kind of rest. And I'll share that I actually find that very, very helpful as well. So sometimes when I'm quite tired and I need to just reset, it's not that I necessarily need to sleep for, say, 20 minutes, but maybe I just need to lie down with my eyes closed and just kind of be present there and give my body that reset. So that's another possible way. Things that give us pleasure, things that we enjoy. So whether it's a comedy show, whether it's lighting some incense of an aroma that really kind of brings us back to, say, a childhood memory, whether it's music, there's lots of different things that are out there for us that can help us become centered and calm, cool, and collected that aren't necessarily meditation.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about athletes and people who are very successful, here's something I want to share with you because I recently watched this movie again. Phenomenal movie, Any Given Sunday. A lot of
Oh
great,
yeah.
great
Oh
lessons
yeah.
in that movie. And
Yep.
what's coming up for me right now is there's a scene where Al Pacino, as the coach, is talking to Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx has just come out of the game. It's an important moment. Things can be very focused on, I have to get this done. If we don't do this, we're going to win. And it can become
Oh,
anxious.
tight. Yeah.
And what Al Pacino does in that moment as a coach is instead of talking about the play or the game, he goes, I've been meaning to ask you. when you came over for dinner the night, did you not like the jambalaya? And Jamie Foxx replies like, no, I hated it. It was terrible, right? It's the worst thing I ever tasted. And there's a smile that comes across his face, and there's levity there. And so
Yeah.
Al Pacino, as the coach, purposely brought Jamie Foxx to a place where he's going to be centered and calm and collected.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different ways other than the traditional quote unquote woo woo and meditation way of bringing us to being centered. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to kind of share a number of different ways with our listeners and viewers today, because I think it's a phenomenal point, and I think that there's ways for all of us to do it that feels appropriate for us to do, that aren't just meditation.
Yeah, and as we kick some of these things around, it makes me zoom out a little bit and think about what we're really talking about, or maybe one lens on it. You know, maybe my lens. I think about, we have our body, right? We have our brain, we have our mind, and then there's us. The mind is subordinate to us in my book, and just like we train or request something out of our muscles or maybe out of our brain, we have that same opportunity with our mind. And when we take some of the steps that you're talking about, or take some of the steps that really have us centered and have us cleared, we're assuming that supervisory role of our mind. So we're in charge at the highest level, rather than we you probably heard, if you ask your mind for a question and you're not really conscious or intentional about it, it will give you an answer, and it's going to give you whatever answer is queued up at that point in time, or what might be part of an old loop, or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's okay, but it's probably not going to be what we want. And when you think about visualization, Olympic archers, they shoot 1,000 bullseyes in their mind. They tell their mind to shoot bullseyes before they go and shoot the bullseye. All those different things come into play, but
Yeah.
it's all about having um, you know really accepting the reins, or taking the wheel at the highest level in all these components of who we are, the mind included. The mind can be a wonderful thing, provided we accept our supervisory role of it.
Yeah, I love it. By the way, Layla agrees with you 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, she just wanted to
Charlie
chime
too,
in.
he's whimpering.
uh, it's a wonderful point, and I think it gets to the heart of this, where we're talking about focusing on what we want, and that was a key thing when you're talking about the archer visualizing shooting the bullseye first before we do it. They're focusing on what they want versus don't miss,
Yeah.
don't shank it,
Back to the
right?
positive.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Let me pivot just a little bit, actually. I'm curious, what else do you find as themes across the board with your folks when we talk about the mental side of it and mentality, and how that helps them achieve their goals?
Yeah. Let me go back to a block, just because I don't mean to focus on the negative, but like I really believe, oh, 2/3 of the battle is just getting what's in the way out of the way. Like
Mm,
there's most clients, there's nothing to fix. They're perfect who they are. They usually have some things in the way. I'll speak for myself, but I think about how oftentimes, if we're not really intentional in our minds, or with our minds, we do tend to catastrophize a lot of things. You know, I'm quoting someone else. This is not my stuff, but the 3 Ps. Personal, pervasive, permanent. Like, is this forever? Is this personally really all about me, or am I personally 100% at fault, or is this personally all on me?
mm,
Those types of questions. Um, and then, permanence, or pervasiveness. Is it always this way? Is Kevin, is he always resistant to your conversations?
mm.
I'll challenge you, Steve. Is he? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Right.
or are you always showing up that way,
Right.
or is it a little bit of both? I think about those types of questions we could plug into our our consciousness and ask of ourselves or a situation and release a lot of I don't know that's necessarily a form of being stuck. I think that's more of a block to objectivity and a block to flow and things like that. But I go to some of those P's when we think about themes that are consistently in the way for folks. Those are some biggies.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. So there's something coming up for me about the most common limiting beliefs that I find with people, because you're
Mm,
touching upon them and you touched upon some others in this conversation as well. But a lot of times people jump to conclusions. A lot of times people think it's all or nothing, black
yeah,
or white, one way or
yeah.
the other. There's no in between. Then the other two most common that I find are assuming the worst
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough. I don't belong
yeah,
here.
yeah,
They're going to find out.
yeah. Oh, what happens when I'm
Yeah.
revealed?
Yeah. Those are the four most common ones that I see across the board. If I were to maybe step down a little bit deeper and look at what's kind of maybe the next most common. Now, this is something that I do see, but it's not nearly as common as the other ones. But it's disqualifying the positives. So
Mm,
I look back upon maybe what I experienced, but I only take away the negatives,
yeah,
not the positive from it.
yeah.
Yeah.
You brought something up for me. You know, we accomplished something. We accomplished something really good, and then we immediately bitch about how long it took.
Mm,
Oh, geez, it's like talk about dropping an anchor on forward progress from there. That's a great example of just diminishing what the terrific things that we did do, and then
yeah.
focusing back on no, okay, let's qualify or equivocate or reduce what happened because it wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
I tend to think life's more about excellence than perfection. Perfection is hard, maybe not possible, or maybe perfection is it always is some of the flaws, but we do tend to look at the flaws, don't we now?
Yeah.
You know? Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. And going back to the earlier conversation, I think one of the major things that helps us get to overcoming that, like you said, overcoming maybe those two thirds that you're talking about, is I have to know what that is first before I can overcome it. I think the awareness piece is absolutely huge. And then the acceptance piece, right? Not only if this is, yeah, it's okay, that's where I am now, but acceptance that there is a way forward and it is possible. And it just simply takes time. So we've talked about this before, and I've talked about this before on this podcast, right? But it takes time for us to literally rewire our brains and build this new way of thinking, this new way of communicating, this new way of believing in ourselves. Whatever happens to be, it takes time for us as human beings to do that because we're not one day delivery on Amazon.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
even though we think we want everything to happen now because that's what society tells us, it doesn't apply to ourselves as human beings,
yeah.
unfortunately. We don't change like that or overnight. It does take time for us to shift, especially if we've been, say, doing something for 30 years, for 40 years, for 50 years. If we've been
Mhm.
doing it that way, because of how deeply ingrained it is in us, it just takes even longer to build the new neural pathways to overcome it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've probably said this to you in the past. In coaching, the magic happens between sessions, right? Like
Right.
how many times do we as a coach process something post conversation, or the
Yeah.
clients like, oh my goodness, I woke up and I connected into this and related to our conversation 3 days ago. I want to talk about this in our next session because I'm on to something here. Like
Right.
there is the time element is I was going to say inescapable, but that's a negative. The time element is it's a positive. Like it is there actually in many ways to serve us, even as excruciating as it feels to wait it out or not have the answer or think about a work situation when we're called out on something and we don't know, right? And oh, it feels awful. But then, how many times does the solution or the awareness or the reality or the correction or the next level simply come in time? And it doesn't mean we're passive and we just wait it out or anything, but
Right.
it's you talk about allowing time to have its proper place and allowing time to be a supportive element rather than something that is detracting or distracting or taking away from our performance. And it's hard because, hey, man, we're on clock time, right?
Right.
And it's, we've got to be done with this by this time, or the end of the quarter, or our EPS has to be this by the end of 2021, or all those different things. All okay when they're used consciously as a tool. When we let clock time become a block, that's when we get in some trouble, and we deny some of the power that time can actually serve us with.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, actually, I'm curious to hear what stands out to you as a whole today. What would you leave our audience with as some kind of commonalities and key takeaways from today?
Yeah, I'm going. I keep going to the R. Recognize that
Mm-hmm.
this is whatever someone's faced with. Whether if it's something nominal or something major, this is all part of the human experience. We are humans. We are evolving through it. We're growing through it. Um, Sometimes we're suffering through it. We're always learning through it. And there are really common, really consistent things that we all go through. And it's like there's some peace in that. That's what's coming up for me is the big one. Um, I think that like all the things that we talked about, if someone listening to this podcast, you've probably felt that, and so have Steve and I, and so has everyone in your life has felt the same or very similar things, and um, these can be things that work to our benefit.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at it as we bring this conversation home.
Yeah, I like it because I think for me, it's very similar. I think across the board today, we've talked about a couple common themes of acceptance, which is kind of where we started, right? Accepting where we are, acknowledging that that's okay, and where I want to go is possible as well,
Mm,
right? That's
yeah,
that's another piece of it. I think the acceptance
yeah.
and it really starts with the awareness of those things of where I am and where I want to go, so I can start identifying that. And when we dig dug, excuse me, deeper into that, we talk about a process in the moment to get ourselves out of being stuck. We talked about preparing ourselves for certain conversations or instances that may not serve us in life by calming, centering ourselves ahead of time, which I think is a great trick and tip to help us ensure things go the way that we want them to go. So those are some of the things that really stuck out to me today with the addition of what you want, it is possible. It is possible to get there. It is okay to be who you are because you're not alone in that humanity and there is a way forward and we are capable of walking that path.
Yeah.
And that for me as a whole, I think is what I take away from our conversation.
Yeah. Amen, brother. Yeah.
So let me ask, how can people find out more about you, get in touch with you? How can they do that?
Sure. Yeah. You can find me at pointacoachingandconsulting.com. That's the easiest gateway. You also see me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, but the website's usually the best place if you'd like to connect.
Now on LinkedIn, on the social media, what do people search for? Is it your name, Kieran Diorio, or is it Point A? What would they search for?
Either way
Okay,
should work. Yeah. Yeah.
perfect. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast with me. I've really been excited and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Me too.
And thank you so much for doing this, and I appreciate you.
All right. Likewise, Steve. Good chatting with you, bud.
Thank you, man. Same here, and
Okay.
Look forward to having you back on.
You got it. Talk soon. See ya.
Take care.